Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, hiring a publicist to get you into the Village Voice, or else a scrappy upstart, asking your friends to upvote you on a Reddit thread about singer-songwriters, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of July 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Constantine who drove a Mitsubishi Lancer with spinning rims and a Flying Lotus bumper sticker, and who was always trying to sell you pirated seasons of Malcolm in the Middle on DVR. And old Constantine would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, every single Sunday night, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. Every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. A subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you're not going to miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thanks to everybody who has done that and signed up over at Patreon. And if you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, it's totally cool. It's no problem. I'd still ask, though, that you could contribute to the show in a couple ways that are free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show, spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope you enjoy this conversation with the living legend, Mr. Jim Lauderdale. Our guest this week is one of the progenitors of the modern Americana music movement. For the last 30 years, Jim Lauderdale has been a mainstay in the genre, a frequent collaborator with both Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter and also with Dr. Ralph Stanley. That's both ends of the musically progressive and conservative spectrum in roots music. He's recorded 31 albums of his own, and his songs have also been favored by other recording artists. George Strait, Elvis Costello, Blake Shelton, the Dixie Chicks, Vince Gill, and many others have cut Jim Lauderdale songs. He's recorded for Yep Rock, New West, Sugar Hill, and Proper Records. His collaboration with Ralph Stanley, I Feel Like Singing Today, was nominated for a Grammy. Rolling Stone has called him Americana's Godfather. NPR has said of his prolific output, few Nashville fixtures have let their influences, instincts, and interests lead them into greater or more varied productivity or been less hindered in their collaborations by the dividing lines between scenes and formats. And American Songwriter has said of him, if Jim Lauderdale never recorded another note ever again, he would still boast a catalog that would be the envy of any other artist, regardless of genre. Jim's new album, Hope, is slated for release at the end of the month on July 30th via Yep Rock Records, and I had the chance to catch up with him on the phone earlier this week to hear about his journey so far. Jim Lauderdale, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about growing up in South Carolina? I think you were born in North Carolina, grew up in South Carolina.
Yeah.
What did music look like around your house growing up?
My mom was a choir director, chorus teacher. My dad was a minister, and he had a great voice, singing voice. And my mom, he could sing tenor and bass really well. And my mom had a beautiful voice. And my sister, my older sister, Becky, we had music around the house constantly of different types. From them, they had a few albums of Broadway musicals, and like Camelot and some kind of a compilation thing. My Fair Lady. They had gone to college with a fellow that was a trumpet player that went to join a vocal group called the Ron LaSalle Quartet, which was kind of like Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. It was kind of this jazzy type vocal group thing. They had folk music. Country music was in the background, bluegrass. And we moved to a larger city, Charlotte, when I was 5. This was from Troutman, North Carolina, to Charlotte. And radio, music was still around, all, various types. And then the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan, and that changed, the world for everybody. And so my sister started buying singles and albums, and so I just became obsessed with the Beatles. And then that, with each Beatle release that I would just really anticipate, on TV, there were all these music shows, and I started digging Paul Revere and the Raiders, and the Monkees, and then she started getting records by Cream and Jimi Hendrix, and it's just such a great time musically on the radio, Motown, Stax, all of that. And there was a station in Charlotte that would have country music, and it was called Carolina Country Style. And there was a TV show in Charlotte called the Arthur Smith Show, and he was a guitar player, and he'd have a great band, and he'd have bluegrass bands on there. And I started to learn. I became bitten by the bluegrass bug, and got a banjo when I was 15, and started playing banjo. And we moved to South Carolina, to Due West, South Carolina, a college town, a place called Erskine. And I became a part-time DJ for the station in the 3 years I lived there, and would just get a ton of free albums. And so that was really a great time musically, and I really got into blues and started playing blues harmonica. And, as with a lot of kids back then, you would discover certain things. Like I discovered John Lee Hooker through a blues rock band, Canned Heat. They did a record together, and listening to this Frank Zappa record that one of the college students had loaned me. There was this great blues song that Frank Zappa did on there with a great solo and everything. And it was a great eclectic stylistically, an eclectic period musically to kind of develop. So that was just wonderful. And then I started really getting into hardcore country, like George Jones and Johnny Cash and Haggard and stuff when I was about 15. And then I moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which I know you spent some time there.
I did, yeah.
And I went to a high school called Carolina Friends School, and I was able to play a lot of banjo. Unfortunately, I was neglecting my academic studies, but just doing a ton of music. And I really got into the Grateful Dead during that time and got to see them at Duke University in 1973. And I just also had developed this real love for the pedal steel guitar. And I kind of started writing towards the tail end of my senior year of high school. This melody just came out of me one time when I was visiting some folks that were like surrogate grandparents for me in this little town, Troutman, North Carolina. And then when I was a freshman, I went to college. I really wanted to do music, but I was a little, things were just kind of foggy for me. And my folks really wanted me to go to college and study something. And so I'd been in some school plays and also a high school mime troupe. And so, and I loved it. And so I was accepted into this place, the North Carolina School of the Arts, for drama. So I went, and it was a really tough schedule. I always likened it to like, gosh, this must be what med school is like. I mean, it was really high pressure and just long hours. But I was still doing music, and they had a coffee house there, and there were chances to play at school, and there were some clubs around town, and I was in a country band for a very short period my freshman year, and on a bluegrass band also. But it was just too busy, so I would just do solo things, and then gradually started working with a guy, David Wood, that played pedal steel and telly. So he would kind of switch off, and I'd play some banjo and play some guitar, play some dobro, play some harmonica. And I'd gig as much as I could. And then I moved up to Nashville for about 5 months after college, but couldn't really make a go of it.
Yeah, what was the Nashville like that you found then? Like your first bite at the apple there, like what was your initial impression of the town moving there?
I really loved it, and there would be these open mic nights, and backtracking a little bit, when I was in college, I started writing more, and things started taking shape where, whole songs would get done, and I I think I was a sophomore, or maybe it was the summer before my sophomore year, but I got with a guy that I had played with. He was like a guitar playing hero for me. His name is Zan McLeod. And there was a guy named Rick Boley who started a store eventually. At this time, he didn't have a store, but we'd go to bluegrass festivals, and he would sell stuff out of the back of his truck, and it was called Oxbow Music. Eventually, he sold it to a guy there was still a store in Chapel Hill, but it might have been gone by the time he got there. And but Rick and I had a duo, and so I'd play banjo, he'd play guitar, but this guy Zan was just this incredible electric and acoustic player, and he took me to out in the country near Chapel Hill. This guy named Steve Gronbeck had a studio, so he eventually moved to Charlotte and became pretty successful doing stuff. But I did this 3-song demo, and at that time I thought, okay, I'm ready for the big time. I've got these 3 songs recorded, and I guess I will get a record deal. Maybe in a few months, I'll be on the road, by this time next year, touring all over the place. But that was while I was in college. And then when I got to Nashville, I really wanted to hang out with George Jones and this bluegrass mandolin player, singer named Roland White. And I was very taken by the Kentucky Colonels, this group that Roland had with his brother Clarence White. And then these albums that were released of these live recordings after Clarence left the Byrds, he and Roland got back together again, and it was just, they picked up where the Kentucky Colonels had left off, and Clarence went back to playing acoustic stuff. And
is Clarence the guitar player that played that really iconic B-bender part?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, for the Byrds.
Yeah. Yes, he and the drummer of the Byrds, Gene Parsons, developed that B-bender.
Right.
And his guitar, his telly that was first put in, Marty Stewart owns that now and has been playing that for years. And gosh, Marty is so amazing. He's just incredible. But that Nashville, I found at that time, of course, it was much smaller than it is now. And there were a few more. There was the Station Inn where I would go and hang out as much as I could, and Roland White would let me sit in with him. So that part of my dream I got to fulfill. Roland took me under his wing, and eventually we did a kind of a duet record, which was kind of half bluegrass, half non-banjo acoustic stuff. And as I left Nashville, I decided to leave after this 5 months and go to New York, where several of my classmates from college were. And I just had this instinct to go up there, move up there. And I just didn't think I was going to make it in Nashville, and so I went up there armed with some cassettes from this album that Roland and I had done. We did 11 songs, and in the basement of Earl Scruggs' house, it was called, and his son Steve engineered, and Marty Stewart's playing guitar on a lot of it, and a great band. And so I might have skipped that part, but as I was about to leave Nashville, Roland said, "Hey, we ought to do some recording." So this was all like the ultimate dream. And so we did this record, and then I would send it out to places, and kept getting rejections from the bluegrass labels. And I thought, hey, I like this label, so-and-so's on it. But kind of uniformly, they all said, listen, we like it, and, we don't want to close any doors, but you're not like in the bluegrass circuit and working regularly, and we kind of need that. So it was a slight catch-22, because I kind of needed that album out there to get gigs, and get known. And so anyhow, we couldn't get a deal on that, and I just said, well, someday that'll come out. And I'll finish that story about that record later. Okay. It eventually saw the light of day about 30 years later. I'll go ahead and just say, after when I finally got a record deal when I was in my early 30s, after a few years, I thought, okay, now's the time. We can put that out, and I got in touch with Roland, and we each thought the other one had the master, and neither one of us did. It was lost. And then I guess about 3 years ago, I was playing at the Station Inn, and I'd always ask Roland to sit in with me there. Like, not that he needed to sit in with me, but it was just like, this is coming around full circle of how I used to sit in with Roland, and it just meant a lot to me. I really love Roland, and so as he was leaving the stage after he sat in for a couple, he said, "Oh, by the way, my wife found a reel-to-reel in this box that I think's that record we did." And so Yep Rock, as I was beginning to work with them again a few years back, released that finally after all those years, and along with another album I was putting out at the time. And so to kind of.
So is that the album that you ended up going into New York with at that point? You're saying
that's right. And yes, and I had met a guy my last night in Nashville. I went to sit in with Roland at the Station Inn, and these folks came in bringing their guitars, and these two guys and a woman, and they said, we came to see Roland. They talked to Roland. I was standing there. So they said, listen, could we do a few songs? And so he said, sure. So they got up and did a few originals and some Graham Parsons songs. So I thought, oh, well, Graham Parsons, well, gee, I mean, he was, I guess I had heard about him. And then my freshman year of college, I finally got Grievous Angel. Mm-hmm. And he'd been gone for a couple of years. But that is one of those touchstone albums that just totally was a game changer for me, hearing that. And so I just became really enamored with Graham and anything related to Graham, anything like, finding out that he and Keith Richards were good buddies. I had never been a Stones guy. I was always a Beatles guy, and for some reason just didn't feel that pull. And then my cousin Ace, who was an older cousin, when I was visiting him once, I said, oh, I see you've got all these Stones albums. And I knew he had been a big Elvis fan too. And I kind of missed Elvis when I was growing up. It was like, he's the guy that does all these movies, that are kind of corny. And so he loaned me the Sun Sessions and the Stone stuff up to Sticky Fingers. And And so hearing the Sun sessions from Elvis just also totally opened up this whole world. And I realized then what he was all about, and really got this deep appreciation for his music. And with Exile on Main Street, I could really hear this. There was this thread with Graham Parsons with that, and that really made me really appreciate the Stones, and I got really into them. And so to make a long story interminable, as far as it's like background stuff, this guy, going back to the thing at the Station Inn and Graham Parsons, where I was leading with that, was this the leader of that band, the Steel Angels, was this guy named John Messler. And he said, we live in New Jersey, you know, we wanted to come down to Nashville. And I said, I'm getting ready to move to New York. Do you know any places to play? And he said, I'll get you a gig. I know a place. And so there was this place called O'Lunny's, which was the first country bar in New York. It was an Irish bar on the east side near the UN. And so when I got up to New York, I had to get a day job but it was like the next weekend I had this solo gig. I'd play between the band's sets. It was like 4 or 5 sets a night on Fridays and Saturdays when I could get it. It wasn't every weekend. But and in that band was Larry Campbell, a great multi-instrumentalist. And I said to myself, someday I really want to play with this guy. And I went to Matt Umanov's guitars and was just kind of hanging around and telling people I just moved, and you know, I'd done this record with Roland White, and by this time I hadn't gotten all the rejections, you know, and I really thought that record was going to be my calling card for my career, you know, to go from bluegrass to kind of traditional country sounding stuff. And so I ironically, at that time in the fall of 1979, there were a lot of these country bars started sprouting up in Manhattan and the surrounding area, in Connecticut and Long Island. And that winter I met, and so it was like my first gig there, I'd met this guy, Matt Umanov's Larry Packer, a fiddle player. And so I had him, and he got another fiddle player, Marty Laster. And so I had twin fiddles, and met this pedal steel player, Dave Magrum, and I met this bass player they recommended, and his name was Tony Garnier. He played Stanley. He had been in Asleep at the Wheel and moved to New York. All these great players had moved to New York right around that time. A bunch of Texas guys migrated up there, a bunch of guys from Nashville. And so it was a cool scene, and it was like on the other side of that scene was like the kind of new wave thing was going on by that time. And it was just a real fertile period musically up there. I mean, New York has always been that way. But also a funny story, speaking of the stuff, I had gone with a group of college friends to hear a singer-songwriter who was a year behind me in school. Her name was Lily Montero Diaz. Mm-hmm. And she was great. She got and did great. She was down at CBGB's, and I'd never been there. I thought, oh, I've read all about this place. And she was awesome. And she just did a solo thing and was so compelling and so good. And I asked the people there, I said, hey, I'd like to come here and do a solo thing sometime. So they gave me this date, and it was pretty easy to get this gig. And so I made a huge mistake by thinking, punk place, I need to become like, I need to change everything and write a batch of songs that I can get up there and do solo. and so I did this thing of my interpretation of what I thought I would sound like if I was doing punk type stuff. And I did a few, and throw in a few rockabilly things in there too. Yeah. And so the day came for the gig, and I was just terrified. And I called and I said, "Hey, gosh, I'm come down with something. I'm really sorry. So I was chickening out, and they said, "Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Can you do next Tuesday?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I did, and I had this electric ES335, and I took it and slicked my hair back and wore like a referee's shirt, that zips up stripe, and I was just, I'd never been so scared in my life. And so it was like empty practically when I got in. And so the lady behind the bar that had booked it said, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but there's probably not going to be hardly anybody here tonight because Public Image Limited just announced this show down the street at Great Gildersleeves, and it's going to be going on at the same time." It's like, oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Saved
by
I
did
the bell.
This show.
That's great.
Saved by the bell. But years later, I realized it's like, man, if you would have just gotten up there and done the stuff you do, if you would have just done bluegrass and country,
they would have loved it.
That would have been, but I thought you had to be this kind of snarling, I just didn't understand it. But anyway, so that was a lesson in just, be yourself.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. One of the qualities I love most about Jim is his ability to create with other artists of every disposition. He was nominated for a Grammy for his collaboration with bluegrass patriarch Ralph Stanley, a bulwark of roots music traditionalism. And yet, he was also a close friend and collaborator with the lyricist Robert Hunter, whose work with the Grateful Dead would do more to push the aesthetic envelope than almost any other act in Americana music. Jim's own music borrows from both sides. And to give you an idea of the more dreamlike and impressionistic side, I'd like to read a set of Robert Hunter lyrics as if they were a poem. And you can see what a tremendous ambitiousness it takes to marry such abstraction with the meticulous precision of bluegrass. That's what Jim does all the time. These are the lyrics to Hunter's masterpiece, Dark Star. Dark star crashes, pouring its light into ashes. Reason tatters, the forces tear loose from the axis. Searchlight casting for faults in the clouds of delusion. Shall we go, you and I, while we can, through the transitive nightfall of diamonds? Mirror shatters in formless reflections of matter, glass hand dissolving to ice petal flowers revolving, lady in velvet recedes in the nights of goodbye. Shall we go, you and I, while we can, through the transitive nightfall of diamonds? Spinning as set the stars through which the tattered tails of Axis roll about the waxen wind of never set to motion in the unbecoming round about the reason hardly matters, nor the wise through which the stars were set in spin. So Jim, one of the motifs in your career that recurs over and over again is your success in collaborating with other artists. Obviously, you've had, over the years, a very multi-decade collaboration with Buddy Miller. You've collaborated with Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter, a very successful and Grammy-nominated collaboration with Ralph Stanley. What, in your opinion, after having done all that, leads to success when you're collaborating creatively with another artist?
Well, let me take John Oates as an example, who's a great writer. And I remember reading a quote from that he made in some music magazine years ago, where I believe he had majored in literature in college for a while when he went, but it was like this pyramid type thing where you hit them with the big, most important stuff in the first verse, chorus, second verse, and it can gradually decrease, once you've kind of gotten your point across. You see what I'm saying? It's like you want to really kind of boom, go in blazing at the beginning, and if you don't, that's more important sometimes than to go ahead and grab people's attention. But after reading that, and then I've been so fortunate to write with people like him and Elvis Costello and those other people you mentioned. And for instance, when John Oates and I get together, I'm very familiar with his work with Daryl Hall and John Oates, but he had such a folk background and roots music background that we had something we could really also relate to, and so he's very diverse as far as the styles he can write in. And I think, with John or any co-writer, let's just say that, one of your listeners out there is in a place where there's not a ton of people to co-write with. For instance, Nashville, there's so many writers. I mean, it's probably the writing capital of the world, I guess you'd say, just because there's so many writers. But no matter where you are, and just kind of starting at the beginning of, if you're in a co-writing situation, my advice to somebody would be very open to the other person. Of course, it depends on the situation. Unless you are necessarily writing for your album, but you're writing for this other person's album, or you're trying to write for another artist, or you just want to see what comes out. There are a lot of different subtleties to your what you want with your finished product. I have been in situations with co-writers where I kind of start out, especially if I don't know the person. You know, a lot of times in Nashville, you might get paired with somebody you've never met before, never seen, aren't familiar with at all. So it's like a blind date. And it can be intimidating, but at the same time, you just never know. And these couple of hours you get with somebody, what's going to turn out. And the way I look at it is with co-writing is that my attitude is that it's probably going to be something that I could have never written alone. And so it's great. My favorite thing is when it is a real collaboration, when it is kind of a 50-50 contribution from both of you. But it's not always like that. Sometimes your co-writer has more, like you come in and they've got an idea. So you go, well, sure, okay, let's go for that. You know, let's work on that. That's fine. And then they go, okay, here's how it goes, whatnot. And they kind of, you let them run with the ball, you know, and then you see if there's anything to add, you know, and sometimes people are very guarded. Which is odd that they would want to co-write if they already kind of have their minds made up.
Right.
But, you know, a lot of times people are, you know, you're a little nervous. You get with somebody, it's like, well, shoot, I need something. And so, you know, but I feel like if you're going to share something with somebody, if you're going to share that experience, then you really kind of need to be very open and willing to bend to what your co-writer wants to do. And you have to kind of choose your battles and chalk up a lot of that to, it's like, hey, you know, this is my first time with this person. It might be the only time, you know, and so you get with them and I really like to co-write unless a lyricist gives me something, or somebody gives me a melody, is to just go in there totally blank. And I co-write with, you know, just talking to the person and seeing, and 9 times out of 10, they're talking about their lives or what happened this morning or whatnot. And they might say something that it's like, wait a minute, what did you just say? And then it's like, man, that's a great title, or gosh, that's a great opening line, or that's a great theme, that's a great idea. And even if you're co-writer, then from that point on, let's say you get real excited about this title that your co-writer accidentally, or they might have a list of titles. A lot of times I'll write with somebody and they'll go, well, let's see here, what do I have? And they throw something out, or they throw several things out, and you maybe pick one of those, or maybe nothing's moving you. There is this, we're all sensitive to some extent, and you definitely don't want to kind of throw a bunch of roadblocks up to your co-writer and be like, no, I don't like that. No. Yeah. You can just kind of sit there while they're saying, well, how about blah, blah, blah. I've got blah, 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 blah. And even if you're thinking, oh, God, no, that's a terrible title or whatever, then just kind of keep things, I think the important thing is to keep things moving, and that also, one thing is sometimes you might start something with your co-writer, and then let's say for a half an hour or an hour, though, you're both kind of going, well, gee, and you feel kind of stuck. Then one thing that just kind of happens with me naturally, and I don't know if it's kind of what the diagnosis is or whatever, but sometimes will be, even if it's good and even if it's working well, I'll start getting another idea of something totally different, either a melody or something that they said that maybe doesn't fit with that song. But then I go, hey, excuse me, hold on just for a second. I want to come right back to this, but I'm getting this other idea I'd like to throw down because you said something or you had this melody and it might not fit. And then you put that down and then you go, okay, thanks. Now let's go ahead and get back. Or, you know what? And if you get stuck, I guess the thing is, getting stuck can really curtail your co-writing experience.
Right.
So if you are stuck, then think of different solutions of either saying, damn it, I'm stuck on this thing, man. I'm really sorry. Let's you said this about this other thing. Let's put this aside for a few minutes and let's go to this other thing, or whatever, one thing that I find that seems to happen a lot is, let's say you're onto something, and you're rolling along, and then your co-writer says, hey, how about blah, 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 this lyric, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that is terrible. I can't believe this person who's an established writer, or they're good. I've heard their stuff. They're good. Yeah. But this is, oh God, I can't. Oh. Yeah. I suggest when that happens, instead of going, no, nah. Right. And I joke with John Oates, if you know your co-writer enough, I call it the songwriter's wince. When I have said certain things to John, and we're friends and everything, and have worked together a lot. But when he kind of gets that look on his face, like, oh God, and so I always laugh about it and joke about it. But if you do that to somebody, it's your first time writing with it, they're going to be thinking, oh gosh, that was a dumb idea. What am I doing? I'm no good. Blah blah blah. It destroys your confidence. So is your suggestion then to let them just put that in and then excise it later? Or absolutely, exactly. I was getting off the track. Yes, they say that and you go, okay. And see, I still write things longhand. Right. I'm one of those Luddites that they're dragging, kicking, and screaming into 2020 or 2010. But I go, okay, no, wait, what did you say again? Okay. Okay. And then you go on, that was the second line of this verse, and you go on. And 9 times out of 10, as you're about to finish the song, your co-writer who had that line is probably going to go, oh man, that line, oh God, that second line, that sucked. I can't believe I said that. Oh, let's come up with something better. How about both? And you go, okay, all right, sure, and then you come up with something better. But and so some different things, if you don't know the person or whatever, and you're in the thing, and they've really got their mind up, and they're really like doing 9/10 of the work, because they're not listening to you. Then you just have to kind of know, it's like, well, it's really not going so great as far as I'm concerned, but hey, they're getting what they want. They're happy with this. Sometimes you have to let the co-writer, if they're really running with something, then hey, let them do it. Let them do it. And then at the end of the song, it's like, well, okay, well, and you don't have to. I always split things 50-50 when I co-write with somebody. Yes. Unless, for instance, though, somebody gives me a riff.
Yes.
Like sometimes somebody's just giving me like a guitar riff.
Okay.
And then I build the song off of that, and there's no title, no lyric. Mm-hmm. You can kind of, I got with them later and said, well, here it is. And then they go, oh, well, here's another little ooh part or ah type thing. You throw that in. And when it's been with people who are in the business, they're very professional, they go, hey, I talked this over with my manager, blah, blah, blah. We'll just, as far as the publishing stuff, we'll just take 30%.
Got it.
Of the writers and publishing share or whatever. And you're okay, you sure? All right, well, okay. But I've been with people who have only given me a title, and I've given them 50% because it's like, well, it's just too, even though I did everything, the melody, all the rest of the lyrics, it's like, well, I wouldn't have done it unless they would have said that, You know what I mean? So it's just like, sure, 50. What does it matter? At the end of the day, it doesn't really, especially in this day and age, unless it was a song as big as like "I Will Always Love You."
Right.
Then you're talking dollars, a few dollars maybe or something. Yeah. With unfortunately, it's the way we get paid these days. And also, I kind of embarrassingly look back when I co-wrote with a guy who was great. And every time we got together, we wrote something. And I was just amazed. The guy was a great guitar player and singer. And I'll go ahead and say who it is because I think he's awesome and he deserves more credit than he gets. His name's Jamie Hartford, and he's the son of John Hartford, and he's a phenomenal guitar player and singer and writer. And every time we got together, we came up with something really fantastic. And I remember there was one song. Well, we got together and we wrote 2 songs, and I put them on an album. And I remember being kind of nervous about saying this and everything, but I called him up and I said, now listen, this one song, now I'm going to put your name first because you kind of had the idea, and went for there. But this other one, it's like I kind of had the title and then we went from there and everything. And he's like, sure, whatever, I don't care. And I realized later it was like, God, why does it matter? Because several years later, I would even make a point of putting my co-writers' names first. And some people do it alphabetic, like it's like, well, your last name started with the J and mine's L, so I'll put your name first. But folks, it really doesn't matter, at the end of the day. It that kind of thing. It's like, hey, I wrote this song with so and so, and it doesn't. The putting your name first just doesn't matter. And
I'll put your name first, but you only get 10%.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Well, man.
But So anyway, but in summation,
Yeah.
I would say to everybody out there, if you're co-writing, make it as comfortable as you can for the other person, for yourself, and be open to anything they say. But it does help things, though, if they do say something that you then use as a title for that person with them, then there you go, right there. You've got your title, and then that, of course, is such a huge part of the song. And but just try to have fun. If it is an unpleasant experience, or you just and sometimes you get. It's been a long time, but sometimes I've gotten this together somebody 2 or 3 times for one song and really labored on it, and then it just never happened. It just wasn't anything. That's gonna happen possibly. My not rule, but it's just like. But I find, and usually sometimes it's because of scheduling, you just get with that person maybe one time. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You both know.
Right.
It's like, hey, let's do this again. You know, and because we're all wanting, in the best case scenario, to create magic. Right. Something that's like, oh my God, I love this. I just love it. You want that energy and enthusiasm and that unknown thing. We as songwriters or listeners or players, it's that thing that just really stands apart, and that you play for an audience and they love it. You love doing it. And so that's what we're all going for,
Yes, it is. And I think you've achieved it on your forthcoming record here. So thanks so much for coming on to the show to Joe, let us know all that. And yeah, man, I wish you best of luck with this new record and all the touring and everything behind it.
Well, thank you so much. And I have so much respect for you and love you as an artist. So thank you.
Thank you, man.
I appreciate that.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Jim Lauderdale's forthcoming album is entitled Hope, out on July 30th via Yep Rock Records. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.